the purpose of today is really to talk more about what does literacy and numeracy mean in everyday lives. What are the stories behind it? And ending with how we can use those stories to better communicate the issues. So, sessions brought together a range of people from different backgrounds. I put a message out to the TC's advisory group on literacy and numeracy saying, give me some names of some good people, and these are the wonderful people that we got names of through different means. I was really worried that it was not going to be gender balanced, so I pushed to make sure we got some men, and then it's kind of swung the other way, so that's just how things happen. And really what I want to do, Diana and I are kind of going to manage this as a conversation. But the first thing we asked everyone to do was to bring along a picture or an object that they could talk about, which to them portrays a story of what literacy, language and numeracy means in everyday life. So use this, rather than going through and introducing everyone, you've got their bios. I'll use this as a way of them also introducing a little bit about themselves and to talk about the picture object that they have brought along, which are in no particular order on the PowerPoint, so I may forget whose is whose. So, quickly, those are names of the people. Oh, and I should make sure I introduce it. I am from the Ministry of Education, just not hiding that. I've worked there for a lot of years. Okay, so, Steve.
Lucky first.
Yes.
When I got asked to be on this panel, David asked me to send in the picture, something to do with literacy, so I sent him in a picture, and then I read the brief in detail last night, and I've been spending most of that time since then praying for opposite. Hopefully it's a nice story. Greg Allen from Workbase, we run workplace literacy programs. And at the end of our programs, we have a graduation where we give a certificate to all the participants that finished or completed the program. For about 15 to 20% of the people we work with, it's the first recognition of educational achievement they've ever had. And often they'll bring family along just to see them get their certificates. About 8 years ago, when I first took over the role, we were running a program for a large hotel complex. Working with the cleaning staff. They had 2 shifts, a day shift and a night shift. And we were organising the graduation for that program. We managed to get the chairman of the board of directors to come down and give the certificates out. I was acting CEO at the time. And between him and the cleaning staff, I think there were about 5, 6, 7 layers of management. And they all decided they'd come along as well. So at the graduation, we had more people in suits than we had people who were cleaners. The managers said that they could come to the afternoon graduation but couldn't make the nighttime graduation. So we started the ceremony, and the first lady came up to get a certificate. She took the certificate from the CEO, first time she'd probably actually touched him or seen him. And then she turned around and she said to him, "Can I say something?" He said yes. And then she looked at everyone and she said, "Before the program, when I'm doing my cleaning, a lot of the guests would come up and ask me, what can we do in Auckland?" And she said, I was so embarrassed, I couldn't say anything to them, so I just huddled up and hoped that they'd go away, and eventually they did. And or she would walk away. But she said when she started the program, she practiced her speaking and working with the tutor on that, and every night or every week she'd take a brochure home and practice her reading and reading through the brochure and learning about the different parts of Auckland. And then she turned to everyone with an amazingly big smile and said, "And now when people ask me what can I do in Auckland, then I can tell them." And then she went and sat down, and then after her, every person on that program got up and gave a little speech on the effect that the training had had on their work life or their home life. The managers who couldn't make the evening shift all turned up for that evening shift. And since that, we've run programs, since that 8 years, we've run programs with that organisation every year since that time.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Bruce George. This is my poster. I'm standing up just so I can see if anyone's sleeping at the back. So this poster represents where I was born. 4 brothers, 4 sisters, grandparents that lived with us, uncles, aunties, cousins. They all came and stayed with us in Sunset Road in Aotearoa. The house was also a church for Cook Island people in Aotearoa and Tokoroa. And to be honest, it was just, for me, being a small child, it was all this colour, food and singing. So that was church for me. I didn't understand a word, but that's okay. Being the second youngest, tuakana Taina played an important role in my upbringing. And this is about my literacy journey. And in reflection, I thought, school, no, I didn't get much out of that. It was at the home. So I had an older brother that would tell us stories and would organise debates, and I didn't actually know what they were doing, but I would sit there and listen. My reading list was English comics, The Tiger, The Lion, The Phantom, Encyclopedia, which, hardly ever touched it, it looked good, the Bible, and then I'd go through my brother's room, find Malcolm X and Black Panthers, look at the pictures and go, these are pretty cool. Sunset Road is where I went to school. I went to Sunset Primary, Sunset Intermediate. My neighbourhood was the block, or Ford Road, for those who know it, and that's what Once the Warriors are based on. English was our only language. My parents spoke Cook Island Māori, but the minister said, no, don't teach your kids that, teach them English. So there's good and bad in that. In my generation, males went through academic subjects and my sister did domestic. So 4 out of my 5 brothers had postgraduate degrees. 2 of my sisters had undergraduate. So that was the line of thinking back then, and it's a shame. Sunset Road, the poster, is a play by my niece, Media George, who writes about a whānau living in Rotorua in a forestry town with a hidden whānau secret, with a backdrop of Geyserland, Wonderland, Triumph Bonneville motorbike, Jimi Hendrix and the Bible. So literacy for me is whānau stories passed on from generation to generation. We celebrate having mothers, fathers, educators, artists, activists, snowboarders, postmen, bar managers, steel fixers, labourers, filmmakers, playwrights, poets, nurses and doctors, and radio DJs in the family. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Aleeshea Reid. I am currently working in 2 roles, one at Department of Corrections as an advisor and the other at Wellington, which used to be my home a little while ago, and I've come back. So I was asked, also obviously, to bring along an object that represents something about literacy. And I went back and forth a little bit, but what I finally came to was a map. And I brought my mum as well, but there's the clear. For me, literacy is really represented by a map on a couple of levels. And one of those is clearly, in my view, literacy and numeracy skills are really a tool to read the world around us. So they're a way for us to understand how to participate in the community. But one thing that I'm increasingly seeing in both areas of my work is that there's a little bit of a lack of a map for many learners when we're talking about transition. So when we're talking about how we transition learners from one literacy context to another, so that could be from secondary school to tertiary or from prison to employment. What's becoming increasingly clear is that although we've got a lot of tools out there, we've got Papa's Aotearoa, we've got the Workbase literacy profiles, which are awesome, I think what's missing is a map that allows learners to navigate these tools for themselves. And what that means is that learners are increasingly hitting roadblocks. One story in particular I'll share is an individual who was on probation had been looking for a full-time job for a long time. And this story was shared with me by one of our colleagues in the community. Finally, he found a full-time job, which was awesome. Great path. We know that employment is a protective factor against reoffending. Unfortunately, within a couple of weeks, his employer realised that he didn't have the literacy skills to fill in the work-related forms that he needed to for the job. And unfortunately, sadly, the employer made a decision that he didn't want to work with that individual to build those skills. So it was a really big roadblock. I think, yeah, that really reinforces for me the way that literacy and numeracy is a map, not just to help us read the world, but actually to help us make decisions about which pathways we're going to choose.
I'm Nita Zodgekar. I work for the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment in the Employment and Skills Policy team. And I chose a pen because when I was at primary school, I remember we had this computer room at school and it was always locked. And in the computer room, there were 5 brand new Commodore 64s. And it was just the most exciting kind of room for us. And each class got 2 hours in the computer room, but it was the part of the week that we looked forward to the most. And the investment, it was a huge investment for our school. And I remember it was highly contested. And my teacher was in the camp of, a bit worried about these things and what are they going to do to help us in our learning and teaching at school. And one of the things she said to us that I always remember is, before you get those machines to do everything that you need for you, you need to learn how to use a pen and a paper. And that's the only way you're really going to understand how to do maths and how to write properly and how to correct your mistakes. Well, my kids were using iPads and iPhones and other technology before they could even write their names. And they were developing skills through those mediums long before they picked up a pen and wrote their name or added, or solved an equation. And now when I look at their classrooms, laptops and iPads are an integral part of the way that they learn basic skills in literacy and numeracy, but increasingly ICT skills are seen as a basic skill as well. And it's now seen as complementary to learning learning literacy and numeracy skills, as opposed to a kind of substitute for them. But then when I reflect on some of the PIAC results for the round 1 countries, and what we're finding is that people that engage more frequently with ICT actually have better literacy and numeracy scores. But then on the other hand, in some occupations, some people can use technology to mask the fact that they don't have some basic literacy and numeracy skills. So it's an interesting question. And when I was on the plane, I was coming back from Sydney last night, and I thought, I better think about what I'm going to say today. And I got my laptop out and I opened up my laptop and the battery had run out. I thought, well, at least I've got my trusty pen and paper, so I think my teacher was right.
I'm going to stand up because although some of my colleagues will tell you that I'm not much different to me when I stand up and when I sit down because I'm so short. But my name's Mike Stiles from the primary Aotearoa, and I've chosen this photo here because it represents a lot of what goes on in industry training. So that trainee there in the centre is one of our younger trainees. They're signed up to a milk quality course, and they're actually very discerning around that. So I've chosen this picture because it represents what happens in industry training. So the real world for us is not often in classrooms, and even when groups of trainees get together, it may be on the back of a ute or on the woolshed or in the local church hall. And when trainees go home, they don't have study desks often or lots of other things, and so in that particular case there, those trainees are working on the floor. And I don't know whether it was the second picture.
Yeah, it's on the...
Oh, sorry, it's on the so the picture on the left-hand side there is another kind of real thing that happens in our sector. So that's the daily milk docket that comes back with each day's milk deliveries to from dairy farms, and that represents for young trainees the kind of information that they have to absorb on a daily way for the dairy farms in New Zealand. So there are some very complicated maths there. They have to do a lot of complicated statistics really in their head to understand what their milk situation is. And I don't know whether you know much about the dairy industry, but if they get that wrong and some of those measurements are wrong, that can cost the employer multiple thousands of dollars. And so we have young trainees in our world who at the age of 20 or 21 could be managing a herd of cows worth $2 million or more. And so for us, that's the reality of education, well, that's the reality of training and literacy and numeracy in our world. So we have, you'll be aware of the all survey data, and that shows up the primary sector as having worse stats than the rest of the economy. It's something we face every day. You'd be surprised how well people can do even without the literacy and numeracy skills that they require. And so I suppose my point here today is with those extra skills they'll do even better. We have a requirement to upskill in many sectors of farming. We know that we can't expand the number of farms, and so we're going to have to make improvements around improved management, and so we have a requirement to genuinely increase exponentially the amount of people that are qualifying at a higher level for us. But yeah, there's our training of the future there. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for that. I thought I should do the exercise myself. And one of my passions is history, and I love going back to the roots of things. So this is a stone from Mesopotamia, so it relates to our whakapapa back into that society. About 5,500 years old. One of the earliest bits of known writing. It is numeracy. It is about counting. It's actually, the historians think it's about beer allocation. So it's a very practical application of recording things in a written form. There's other things you could pull out, but one of the things I've been contemplating from this is actually we are in a really revolutionary stage now. This is something that would only have been written and interpreted by probably less than 0.1% of the population, and that kind of ratio has maintained probably up to about last century, and it's only this, well, century before last, 1900s. 1900s was where we started to say education for everyone, and the 20th century was the reality of that, but as Nita's kind of touching on, and Mike as well, now it's knowledge for everyone. And so it's one of the things I was contemplating was the debate around NCEA in the last few days. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in that, and a lot of debate back and forth. One of the things that struck me was this fear, this real fear of what if everybody got qualified in New Zealand, and shifting from the idea of education being a sorting mechanism to say who are the people worthy of the knowledge, to actually everybody can be literate and knowledgeable. And I was also thinking when Mike was talking about my school friends who, living in a rural community at age 13 and a half, they're plotting how they could get out of school by 14 to go work on the farm, and there was an assumption that that was fine. And so that's some of the generation that Mike's people are working with. Now, minimum probably of doing a year of tertiary before you think about farming. So I'll move on to the kind of discussion and really come back to kind of how we describe things. So in the questions I sent out to the panel, there's phrases that we kind of roll off the tongue very easily, like low literacy and numeracy, has a literacy and numeracy problem, the challenge of literacy and numeracy in adult life, and really wanted them to kind of reflect on to what extent are these phrases helpful or unhelpful, and are there some other ways of describing? So, no particular order to respond to that, so happy.
Our comments from our sector are that many of the trainees we work with have much higher literacy and or numeracy skills than they think they have. They have had a bad experience in a school setting around what people traditionally call literacy and numeracy, i.e. English and maths, but in fact, and they're not that very good at English and maths because they don't want to be. And they're much better at literacy and numeracy than ever they were at English and maths. And we don't really care in our world whether people can analyse a Shakespearean play, but we want them to be able to write and read well. But they've been put off so badly from school-based English and maths that it's had a long-term effect on them, and they're much better in many cases than they think they are.
I think personally the reason that I find these phrases a little unhelpful, particularly low literacy and literacy problem, is that what context are we talking about? Because literacy is such a contextualised thing. So a blanket label like that is actually quite limiting. And the other issue I have is that when those of us who are working directly with learners, when we're doing literacy and numeracy assessments, when we're discussing the results, we're always giving the messaging that there's no right or wrong, there's no high or low, where you're at is where you're at, it's a lifelong journey. But then phrases like that, I think, actually negate that positive messaging. So I think that's a bit of an issue. And perhaps those aren't the most helpful phrases to be using.
Yeah, I guess where we see it, the phrases tend to draw from the deficit model, and it's putting people into boxes. And when you do that, you look at the box and not a person. On the other side, though, they're quite emotive terms, and they're easily picked up by the media. So it's going to be quite hard to get away from them. I think that's a question for all of us as to how do we refocus that.
I agree. It's also it is quite a deficit model, but I also think about whose problem it is, and it's not just the individual's problem. It's the government's problem in terms of broader social well-being and economic well-being, but it's actually it's a problem for workplaces and for firms. When you think about where people spend most of their lives, they spend some time in education, but actually a vast majority of the learning that I've done personally, despite having been in education for a number of years, is in the workplace and has been in the workplace over the last 20 years. And then thinking about, well, what is the role of employers in helping employees upskill, and what is the role of government in supporting employers to do that? And in particular, if you're thinking about sort of government levers in this space, they're very limited, and most of the benefits are for employers, really. So it's just thinking about whose responsibility and what are the roles, and how can we better connect different parts of the system? How can the education system connect better with firms and improving skills utilisation and management capability in firms? It's not just about deploying the skills well, it's also about developing the skills and having some responsibility for that.
I agree with everyone. Yeah, I think it has such a narrow thing when we talk about literacy and numeracy. And I'd like to see us relabel it, make it cool that literacy and numeracy is for life. And maybe something that John Coben did for mental health, it's an everyday thing, and it's, what we all go through. So I think that's some of the things we need to think about.
So I actually really like that idea of seeing the person and not the box. It's a good description. And also the problematizing. I think that's come through a bit in a couple of sessions I've seen with Susan Reid, and Jane Finesse talking about whānau literacy and health literacy and the problemization, whatever that word is, of the individual rather than addressing the whole context. So thinking about literacy, language and numeracy in your work or professional context, this is the next question, what are one or two common stories that illustrate how literacy, language, numeracy, or all three affect people's everyday lives? So what does it mean in their everyday life?
I didn't get that question.
Oh, okay.
I did, but I don't think I answered it well. Now, once again, I just think we tend to label things. And if you're a literacy and numeracy person, you have problems. And I think that once you start hearing that, the self-esteem drops and all those issues come up, and you can pass those on to your children and all these sort of things. So to me, I think it's just about making sure that literacy and numeracy are the norms, and we're not judging people by what they are, and it's a life thing.
I thought about that in relation to, so we've got this survey called the Business Operations Survey, and one of the questions they ask firms is about skill shortages, and increasingly we're seeing over the years that more firms are talking less about technical skills and more about shortages in terms of the kind of soft and generic skills and basic skills, including literacy and numeracy and communication skills. And then I think about the Skills Highway program and some of the case studies and examples from that. And to me, there just seems to be so much untapped potential within firms at the moment. We often talk about sort of immigration as a way of bringing skills in or bringing skills in from the labour market. But actually, there are a lot of people that work within firms that can be upskilled to actually contribute to that innovation and that growth. And I think the Skills Highway examples, particularly one that stuck with me was the Air New Zealand example, where you've got someone that had quite high literacy skills but in another language, and thinking about, well, what can they do to overcome some of the language barriers and some of the other barriers that come with that. So it's the problems are wide ranging, and so are the solutions. And many Kiwi businesses, know that these issues are important, but maybe some businesses fail to understand the link between improving those basic skills and the responsibility for doing that, and improved health and safety outcomes as well as productivity outcomes.
When we see people achieve, and when they see that they can achieve educationally, most of them want to go on and do more. The people we work with in industry, they want to go on and do the industry training or do unit standards or do something to advance their education. A lot of the businesses we work with though, the learning and development manager is also the HR manager, is also the chief executive, is also probably the owner of the business. And they're too busy trying to get the next dollar in to be worrying too much about training. They don't have the infrastructure to carry on the training or do the training with the people themselves. And that's where I think the government needs to look more at, that the big companies can do it, the little companies can't. And there's a lot of people in those little companies that need the training, but the company doesn't have a size to get the funding maybe for workplace training, and can't release the people to actually get involved in that training. And I think that's a big thing that isn't really taken into account. Outcomes from the training, just one thing that I was reminded of when John Bensman did a study looking at some of the workplace training things, and one of the outcomes that he found was that people were less angry because they had better ways of communicating. And you know, there's lots and lots of benefits, but I think how we actually implement and get those things working needs a lot more focus or a lot more thought. You can't just put it onto industry, or you can't just put it onto the government. There needs to be a lot more cooperation and talk about what's the best strategy to get these things going and working properly.
I guess I want to pull it back to the learner level a little bit, and I think my colleagues at Wellington touched on this a little bit in their presentation, that a very common story we see in the ITP sector is learners who think, yay, I'm leaving the book learning behind and I'm going to do a trade and it's going to be hands-on and I'm good at that stuff. And then they actually get there and they realise there's really high levels of technical vocabulary, and it's a lot more challenging and a lot more theoretical than they initially thought. And there's one story in particular, a learner that I worked with a couple of years ago, who really made me see things a little bit differently. And he was doing a level 3 carpentry program, and he had actually been a builder in Samoa. He was great at the trade, good with tools, and he knew his stuff. But he used to come and see me once a week or once every 2 weeks to just practice saying the names of the tools. And he knew the names of the tools, but he wanted to make sure he was pronouncing them clearly. And one day he said to me, I want to sound like a builder. And that was a real light bulb moment for me, because it reminded me that we talk a lot about competency, but it's really about identity and a sense of belonging, and that's something we sometimes forget.
Thank you, Aotearoa. The lady yesterday from Downer talked a little bit about a program that they have been involved in, and we certainly have been involved in as well, around backfilling trainees with their school-based qualifications. Of course, most of them left school without any English and maths. We've put in place a program that has enabled us to backfill them with those literacy and numeracy credits, and we're able to award them with NCEA qualifications. The powerful thing about that is that when we ask the people, do you want your school-based qualifications, which include, of course, the basic fundamental literacy and numeracy, surprisingly 99% of them would say, hell yes, I do. And we've had people of all sorts of ages rock up to be presented or receive those school-based literacy and numeracy-based qualifications, and many of them, of course, have been able, as the lady said yesterday, were able to actually put the hard wood in their own children to actually encourage them to achieve. We've had middle-aged people come to us who are in supervisory roles and have actually said, oops, my staff have now got NCEA, and now I want it as well. So the power of people receiving qualifications and acknowledgement for their achievements, including obviously in literacy and numeracy, is very powerful.
So I was hoping there'd be time for questions. We might be running out of that. Got 6 minutes left. So we're going to get a whole lot of new data next year. I think we'll restrict this to one thing that you would like to see addressed when we release that data, or highlight it.
Do I have to start? I'd like to think that it might highlight where there have been pockets of improvement. So rather than talk about this mass figure, I'd like to think that maybe we could highlight where there have been, because I believe there have been some bits of improvement. And the problem is, of course, when you quote mass data, you hide those bits of improvement.
I think also on the other side of the coin, it would be good to see, obviously we're going to see what work's still left to do, but I think it would be helpful if there was some discussion around how we can actually target the individuals that we're not hitting with the provision. So the ones who aren't going to be going through the traditional outlets that we have, the workplace literacy, the intensive literacy, and these are people potentially, in my view, who represent the highest group of need and who are going to be the hardest to access. So I think it's an important conversation to have. How are we going to start hitting those groups?
I think with IELTS then followed by ALLS, we have added in problem solving. And then you've got PAC with problem solving in a technology-rich environment. We're adding to the basic skill set that people need. And so my hope is that we start looking at addressing that. We're not just teaching reading and numeracy, we're teaching that in a changing technology environment. I've just got a note here from a recent OECD study. It says, literacy was once defined in terms of the ability to read simple words, but in today's international societies, interconnected societies, it is far more. It is the capacity to understand, use and reflect critically on written information, the capacity to reason mathematically and to use mathematical concepts, procedures and tools to explain and predict situations, and the capacity to think scientifically and to draw evidence-based conclusions. I think that's a good case for the disturbing disorientation we heard about yesterday.
There are lots of things I'd like to find out, but one thing that I'm particularly interested in is the impact that technological change has on the way that skills are used in the workplace from an employee perspective, and also to better understand how that affects different demographic groups and different social groups, so we can target our policies better for those groups. And that's against the backdrop of the kind of technological revolution and the increasing importance of those skills for our economy and for better individual outcomes. And I think a really important task for government is to ensure that the institutions that we work with, not just the education institutions, but firms and a range of institutions, actually maximise the opportunities that technology provides us with, but also minimises the harm or the potential harm that and the challenges that it brings to the way that we upskill in the workplace.
It's great having this new technology, but my thing is, does this new technology increase the divide between the haves and the have-nots?
I'm going to put Diana on the spot and see if she's just got some conclusions to wrap this up.
I don't know about conclusions, but it's been really striking me in reflecting on the symposium as a whole and also on what the panel members have been saying. And the earlier points about the importance of avoiding a sort of deficit idea of the population is failing in some massive way, whatever the results will be. Of course, we don't know yet, but I'm looking back at the response to the All survey and the response in some countries to the PAC round 1 results. And I think not only is that damaging to individual learners and would-be learners' self-esteem quite clearly, it's also damaging to a country's self-esteem. It's also politically absolutely nuts, because we're talking about a population survey here of people of working age. A very small proportion, David may know the figures here, have actually been through the tertiary education system. So, it's not, whatever happens with the PAC results, we must avoid the trap of being, oh well, whatever you've been doing has failed in the tertiary sector, because most of those people will probably not have been near the tertiary section. I think that picks up the point that was made just now about the importance of people who are not being reached at the moment, who are not having those fabulous opportunities and ways of working which make them realise, yeah, I can do this, And once you know you can do this, you can do anything, So let's find ways of making that success model, not as a sort of motherhood and apple pie kind of romantic notion of success, but real examples. I love the visual images we've been sharing here, and David and I are going to be looking at ways in which we can build on that approach to try and build more positive messages as we come up towards next year's release of the results. So please help us do that. If you have any bright ideas and you have any wonderful pictures, let us know. Email me, email David. We'll see what we can do, and watch the Literacy and Numeracy for adults.com website. There'll be stuff going up there.
Well, thank you to the panel. Should we give them a round of applause? I certainly found what they're saying very insightful, and it helps. The phrase has gone out of my mind to do with the way. What was it? You just said it before from the presentation. It was around being in a state of disturbed disorientation, that was it. So it's good to help be in a disturbed disorientation, because it's very easy to think in very concrete terms about such a complex